Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eisele, and I'm a professor and director of the FMRI. We are really excited because we have the first in-person lecture series after 2 years because of the COVID, and it's an honor to introduce you to you, Dr. Eisele. So we have the event today is hybrid. Okay, we have virtual and in person. That here in Boca Raton. Dr. Eisele is a senior research engineer and mobility division head at the Texas Transportation Institute in Congestion, Texas, part of the Texas A&M University, where he leads programmatic areas of mobility analysis, urban analysis, transportation planning, and travel forecasting. With over 37 years of experience, he is recognized expert in the areas of freight mobility, urban freight movement, mobility analysis, congestion monitoring, performance measurements, and access management. He is a registered professional engineer in Texas and Michigan, as well as certified project management professional. He is currently freight group chair with the Transportation Research Board, after recently completing 2 terms as a chair of the TRP Urban Freight Transportation Committee. On behalf of the IT FAQ student chapter organized this event today, I would like to thank you all. Billy, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much. It's great to see all of you. It's great to see anyone. Now, after 2 years, I think we started talking about having this meeting 2 years ago. I was planning to be here. It's good that we finally been able to pull that off, and hopefully we have this thing behind us. So I'm going to talk to you about a few things today. I'm going to bounce around a little bit, try to just hit a few of what I think are some of the hot topics in this freight space, particularly talking about data and where new data sources might be coming from into the future, and a little bit about what some of the unique challenges are, because my slides are not in front of me. I'm trying to use this as a prompt, so I'm not turning around and moving my voice. So I think first and foremost, a couple of quick slides on who TTI is, kind of where I'm coming from, just to give you a sense of, because you talk about the evolution of our industry and freight in particular, most research agencies and certainly TTI also sort of had to evolve as there's been some changes in how we tackle problems. We'll talk about typical data. We're going to talk a little bit about visualizations. So much of a lot of what I do is about understanding the performance of the system and then communicating that in effective ways to public and private sector for their own decision making. So we'll talk about how we can do that, some of the challenges, like I said, and then I've got a couple of thoughts, and we'll have some time for discussion. So, every agency, of course, has a vision and mission statement. You can read those. I think what's really important for you to take away from the mission statement, and really what all of you will do in your careers, is it's not only about moving people and goods. You'll see how we've also worked in data into our mission statement. I think I heard that a couple of you have a data focus, and so much of our decision making in the future and always is based upon being able to have good data. So we're going to focus on that and what that might mean for freight. TTI's legacy was really built and started with roadside safety, pavements, bridges. We were essentially the research arm of the Texas Department of Transportation. It made sense for us as a state agency to be at Texas A&M University, and so that's where we did a lot of those studies. But of course, like anyone, we evolved into a lot of these more technological and other areas, technologies, CAV, mobility. You'll recall from the introduction, that's the group that I lead at TTI. Human behavior. Freight isn't necessarily listed, but it's on this next slide of all of the different aspects, really, of transportation and then of research that we tend to cover in our institute. And I show this just because freight and a lot of what all of you will do, and those that are out in TV land listening to this, will inevitably be touching on many of these. So I think particularly as I speak to students, don't pigeonhole yourself into one of these little spots. You're not necessarily going to be doing one of these things. You're going to be aspects of these. Let me give you the answers up front. These are the things that I'm going to be talking about. So that says up at the top, can't really read it too well, key messages. So first and foremost, I want you to be able to keep in mind why having good data, why having the system performance is so important for your decision-making process. And I'm going to talk about some of the data sets that are available. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how important getting to the supply chain is. And getting supply chain data is so important with what we do in freight. And probably I call it the holy grail here because it's sometimes the hardest information to get, because then we're starting to talk to private industry and trying to tap into those data sources that they have that are sometimes tricky to get. And then that last bullet just expresses to you that just to keep in mind that there are a lot of these processes, opportunities, and national, state, and local examples of this visualization and decision making that are out there and available for us to build from. So I put that. Why do you care? Oops, excuse me. Oh, sorry, I forgot that was about one bullet. They're all on my page, but right there, you can read those, right? All right, so those are the things that I just mentioned. Why do we care about freight transportation? If you've watched any of the news lately, you quickly realize that freight movement and understanding freight movement, it's only important if you eat or buy anything ever. So I've always been quick to communicate that to people. There's a lot of people that look up, why are those trucks on the road? Because you keep buying stuff. And a lot of people don't make that connection when they're sitting in traffic or driving along next to all these trucks that are out there. It really is the backbone of our economy. All modes are critical for our freight transportation, trucks, rail, et cetera, I've listed up there. And I think it's important that we keep all of them in mind, particularly we have to as we start to talk about supply chains and getting goods all the way through the entire system. Obviously, an explosion of e-commerce has also made this important. It's only, we're never going back. E-commerce is here to stay. It's going to continue to grow. Is that going to happen? We'll talk a little bit about that as well. That slide for those in the room is a little tough to read the top of the slide. Fixing the problem starts with understanding it. Understanding system performance for planning and investment decisions. So this is essentially the why. Why is this important? With improved understanding, we can identify when, where, and how people or goods are moving. In other words, how are they using the transportation system that we have developed and put out there? We can identify where there's issues. We can identify opportunities with policies, programs, what's worked, what hasn't worked in different places. And I often say, because it's the right thing to do. When and if you're working for a public agency, one day you're going to receive funds for decision making. You're going to receive funds and an allocation of funding to spend in the most proper, equitable way. And through informed decision making, using the right data, and having an accountable and transparent process is so important, I think, for that decision making to be able to explain why you invested things the way you did, because you're going to be entrusted with funds that are being used for these things. Let's talk about the types of data that are out there, and then I'll move into how we can use some of these data. When we talk about particularly system performance in an area that I spend a lot of time in, travel time reliability data sources are kind of the key ones. We at TTI did some work. It's been now close to 30 years ago, where it seems common knowledge now, but when we were first started trying to figure out what are some of the best congestion measures, system performance measures, it's all about travel time. That's what people fundamentally can understand. We can get that from highway monitoring systems, the National NPMRDS, National Performance Management Research Data Set. So that's the FHWA data set that has all of the travel time and information on the national highway system that's out there, automatic identification systems. Those are stuff that data are pretty easy to get a hold of. Cost information, I would say moderately easily. We can get that from businesses. We can get it from survey input, and a lot of these sorts of data sets are available and out there. The volume of goods that are moving, we can get the traffic volumes pretty easy. Again, I'm taking a supply chain break slant to this. Getting the volumes of goods is a little bit more difficult. We have the commodity flow survey information that's out there, freight analysis framework that we can use, census, and a few other things. I mentioned Lloyd's Register. It's a way to understand what types of vessels are out to sea and what kind of volumes those vessels may be able to transport. So when we start to talk about throughput and things, that's a way to get at that on the vessel side. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get a little bit further down the line. This one here in front of me? Okay. So origin destination data, that's also exceptionally good information because that's actually providing you the breadcrumb of how and where people are using the transportation system. It's getting easier. There's a lot of that sort of crowdsourced data that's out there on the trucking side. I think ELDs, the electronic logging devices, are promising for us to be able to get that information as well, better understanding how and where the trucking is coming from, going to. Lots of evolving technologies are out there too, so don't forget about those. I think those are going to be the data sets of the future, much like cell phones that started to kind of power us in the modern age. Once we get more and more connected, those sorts of data sets are going to be tremendously important for us to provide information. So that's the data. I want to move into how we use those data at TTI for a few different products to help visualize and understand what's operating on the system and how that can be used for the performance and understanding where we should make proper investments. Many of you have probably heard about our urban mobility report that we produce every couple of years. It looks at mobility conditions all around the country. The last one we did was in 2021, so it was through 2020 data. And we look at both freeway and principal arterial streets. We have trend data and 101 urban areas around the state that go back to, or excuse me, around the country that go back to 1982. So we have a large suite of performance measures that we look at for a large number of cities around the country to give this snapshot. What do you think happened with traffic congestion in 2020? It went down. Fixed it, right? Yeah, not in the way we ever want to do again, but yeah. If you look at all of our metrics, and I'll show you some of them, probably about half of what we were seeing for congestion in 2020 in comparison to 2020. These are just some of the big numbers. And so I think you can look at the specific numbers. I think the key takeaways for you and particularly those that are beginning in the industry is the message here is looking at different ways to communicate this information to different audiences. Some people, these particular measures are all per auto commuter. So this is providing information to what's it mean to the individual traveler. So it personalizes what are huge delay numbers and makes it make sense to the individual. So you can say, hey, I lost in 2020 on average, I lost $605 in wasted time, cut in half of what it was in 2019. If you think about your personal experiences, yeah, probably true. You were taking classes or working from home much more, and so we did see these reductions. And in many places, we're seeing it come back. Just driving around here for the last couple of days, I've seen that they seem to be coming back, and we're hearing that and seeing that in other places. So the prior slide was per hour commuter, these numbers are sort of the big hairy numbers, right? The big larger numbers, the total numbers of hours, the total gallons, the total cost. What's it mean to trucks? What does it mean to the environment as well? The environmental impacts are certainly equally important, and providing that information as a baseline to better understand the full extent of the problem helps to kind of set up that story for what the investments might need to be. If you look back, our total congestion delay that we had in 2020 was similar to what we had in 1997. So we really moved ourselves back time, but I think we'll see that those numbers will be rapidly coming up. We're seeing in Houston and other places that we're getting right back to 2018 pretty quickly. A lot going on here, but these are just some Florida statistics since I'm standing in Florida. A few numbers from different cities around Florida. Perhaps some of you travel there or are from there. Maybe you might think of that this might be a particular interest. These values are in bold are the ones that are the 2020 values. And I'll let you kind of take a look at this now that you understand what it means, what the rankings are. I'm not going to go through all the particular numbers, but I think what I would communicate is we can provide this sort of information by city. What's also nice is you can compare by like-sized cities across the entire United States. So if you see how we break out our information, it's by the very large cities, the large cities, et cetera. Small ones with the very large, because that's congestion is all relative, right? Relative to your congestion, or excuse me, to your city size. Something new that we've developed in the last couple of years is this visualization of all of the data that we have in the urban mobility report. So you click on this and you can see all of the different performance measures that we have and all of the trend information that we have. And again, this is frequently used at a city level for different agencies to say, hey, look, here's the full extent of our congestion problem that we have. Here's the things that we're really trying to deal with. Here's how bad of an issue it is. You can imagine with particularly environments where you're trying to get more money, the state legislatures really like to have this sort of information here to put some value to what they're feeling when they drive through traffic out there. And you can see how it's really dropped off at the right hand side of the screen. So you can do this for any of the different cities. This is a different tool that we've helped Federal Highway Administration help them with. It's trying to stay here and not be in your way too, which kind of feels impossible. Keep my head here, right there is probably the best way. So this is a freight mobility trends tool. Essentially, Federal Highway Administration came to us with the same question. We're trying to better understand what the bottlenecks are on the system. And so we created a way to do that, look at all the different performance measures, look at that through different geographies. I pulled up Florida again because that's where we're standing right now. But it again provides an opportunity to understand what does the delay look like by particular, in this case, urban areas. What does it look like by the different MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organization regions? Because within those regions, they all have their own allocation of how much they can spend and identify different areas that they're going to spend in. And then we can take it down, and we do, to the particular corridor level as well, too. So it provides an opportunity to look at where those specific bottlenecks might be in the transportation system. Again, all with the intent of powering and providing that information to help with investment decisions. We take it a step further in this tool, and I'm sure that the slides will be made available so you can get the link to play with this a little bit more. But we also have at this national level for freight, we have intermodal facilities, we have airports and ports also. And so this shows for the particular ports, the way we did this is we looked at all the highways. It's all highway based, but we looked around the particular ports and identified what's the operations of the highways around those ports. As I'll touch on a little bit later, particularly we start talking about supply chains and things, goods that are coming in to port and then moving on to the highway. This interface between what's happening on the roadway and what's happening with the ports is critically important. If you haven't noticed that, go to the store, turn on the news, you'll hear about the shortages and some of the issues that we're having with some of these connections. So that's at the federal level. Another example that I wanted to show and share is with what we do with the Texas Department of Transportation. Every year, we provide a top 100 most congested roadways to the Texas Department of Transportation. And it's used in project selection and identifying what areas are most congested and what areas really need some sort of improvement. And the reason I got a couple of these circled is because the short version is we can calculate the delay not only for all vehicles, essentially cars, trucks, everything in the traffic stream, but then also for truck only. So you can see how, as an example, some of these rankings change on the left-hand side, whether we're talking about all vehicles, what's typically being encountered, or what's happening, or what's the truck experience. And it changes and it's different. So it allows us to tell a slightly different and yet equally important story, if not perhaps more important in these last couple of years, about what's happening with freight, where are there bottlenecks in the system, what might we need to be fixing. And again, there's a visualization for this. So providing the bottom line is sort of providing a good way to get this information out to those who are going to use it for investment. And being able to click on it, look at particular locations helps to facilitate that and have those discussions. This is another one we're creating with the Texas Department of Transportation. We call it TCAT, so the Texas truck congestion analysis tool that allows us to visualize in more detail what's happening on the highways in Texas as it relates to freight congestion. I mentioned about a freight story versus an all vehicle story and how that might be different. This is a slide that I think helps display that pretty well. If you know anything about Austin, it's got Austin, Texas, that 535 running down the middle of it. It's from Canada to Mexico, lots of truck traffic comes through there. And it's interesting if you look at the truck data only, which is on the left, versus the all vehicles on the right, pretty much congested all the time. But you can see it actually goes black, something beyond red on the left-hand side for trucks, and then on the side, still bad, don't get me wrong, but there's not quite as much delay for the trucks, as opposed to another loop, just call it another loop, MOPAC, that's out a little bit further west of town, and the trucks don't travel out there as much. And yet the all vehicles, the passenger traffic does. You can get to office space, businesses, a little bit more residential in some places, access to residential out that way. So it's interesting. So it helps to be able to communicate what's fairly intuitive to different audiences to help them understand and really solidify probably what they're experiencing in the field to help get you towards implementation and get you to a point where you can start to fund some of these things. Then the next question often becomes, all right, that roadway is congested. Who do we blame? Or what's going on within that segment of the road that's causing that congestion, right? That would be closer to perfect data if we had a better understanding of where those people coming from, going to, that are causing some of this. And so this is just an example that we've created along Fort Worth on the west-hand side of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, to look at who's traveling northbound along I-35W during the peak period. Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? And this is just for the trucks. And what we found right away was that obviously there's a lot of through movement there, but we could also see that there's some that are coming from some of the distribution centers, warehousing that's south of Dallas, and then heading up across town off to the northwest to an inland port area that we have in Texas that's out there. So again, pretty intuitive, but maps like this that can light things up can help to tell you these different things and may even make you realize that there could be alternative solutions to fixing some of these things. Maybe we don't need to widen the road. Maybe we need to work with a public-private partnership for opportunities to move a docking station or a warehousing somewhere that help to move some of that traffic. I'll work more on the freight demand side of things rather than on the supply side of the problem. And there's so many other things that can be done, are being done with these large crowdsourced data sets with freight information, and I think will continue to power investment decisions in the future. This is just one snapshot that I wanted to provide to you. This is some work that we did out in West Texas where we got all oil in West Texas. And literally overnight, there would be oil wells. And the Texas Department of Transportation really couldn't react quickly enough. It didn't have a really good way to identify where these things might pop up. So they used some of the crowdsourced waypoint data to better understand literally where some of these driveways were out to the oil locations. And you can see how it sort of illustrated itself. We used all this information to see where these intersections were popping up. Because oftentimes when you look out there, it all looks the same. So they started putting the technology on the ground, and it all looks like dirt. All looks like a big driveway, big flat, not a whole lot out there. So I just thought I'd throw that up there just to show you some of the more creative ways that can be used with this crowdsourced data to better understand what's happening with freight traffic, because there really wasn't any way to go out there and watch it, put road tubes in or cameras or anything. So a fairly unique opportunity for use of these type of data. I want to talk about also this concept of freight fluidity. Some of you have probably heard about it. Some of you have certainly heard about it. You've heard me talk about anything related to freight. You've probably heard me bring this up. So we're talking about the performance of trips for goods that are in a region. It's all about understanding what sorts of goods are moving in the region, what are some of the economic conditions, what routes are those different goods taking, what sort of experience are they having on the road, where are the bottlenecks and issues in the system. Not unlike what I was talking about earlier, and what I've been talking about is sort of an aspect, I would say, of the freight fluidity, but we're also trying to bring in a little bit more with the economics here. We developed a guidebook, co-authors of Nicole Katsakides, Jason Wallace, Billy Wong, and a few others at TTI on freight fluidity and how we could use this a little bit better in Texas for decision making. And these are sort of the three main questions or main areas that we covered in that. So what are the key goods and how are they being transported? And then below that, we've identified a few of the tools and things within Texas to help answer that question. In the middle, where is the economic opportunity? So using census data and other information to understand what regions are consuming or producing different goods, and where might you want to incentivize or disincentivize different sorts of industries just based upon what's being used where or not being used where. And then on the right-hand side is all the more traditional performance monitoring and understanding. So how well are the freight corridors moving? All the different things that I've mentioned to you, and then using some of the crowdsourced data sources that are out there to better understand that and to better visualize that. Something else I think is very valuable, and I need to give credit where credit's due here. Nicole Katsakides in our shop came up with this, that better understanding exactly what sorts of questions that you want to answer, and then it sort of points you to the right page to help you with that and tackle that sort of problem within our guidebook. There's a lot going on here. You can look at it a little bit more closely later, but really it boils down to, you want to know what sorts of, how are goods traveling, what part of this the guidebook to look at. What's also nice about this is if you want to look at it from a user perspective and you are a transportation engineer versus an elected official, what sections might have a little bit more relevance to you based upon types of questions that you're typically trying to answer for your constituency. So we tried to capture some of that in there. I talked about this connection between what's happening with the vessels and what's happening on the roadways. We've done some work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers where we've taken essentially all of that I was talking about for bottlenecks on the roadway and done something very similar with vessels. The Coast Guard, they have AIS data on all the vessels, so they're pinging all the vessels, they know where they are all the time. I mentioned that voyage register data that gives you some sort of sense of, for a particular vessel type, what it can carry. So we can start to have a conversation about impacts on throughput and how much the goods literally are moving around, so we can create these little roads, if you will, that light up when we start to look at the crowdsourced data out in the bays and out in the ports. Excuse me, to look at some of these different distributions of the travel time and stuff. This is one that we've done up in Baltimore. You can see how those roads start to appear pretty quickly when you start to look at these pings. And then also we can look at what's the dwell time in the ports. How long is it taking the vessels to get unloaded? So this is a close I have to like a PhD level slide in this presentation. There's a lot of stuff here I'm not going to point to, but the main thing I want you to take away is what I've got there in bold. So the question became, and we did some research on, all right, if a vessel comes into the port, what's the impact on the roadway system? That's kind of the big question when we start to talk about the supply chain. So in this particular case, we did some work in Brownsville, Texas, and so what it meant for vessels is it carrying 1,000 TEUs? What did it translate into in terms of the amount of trucks that particular week? And then in this case, we found 11 more trucks per week 2 weeks before. So gives the impression that there's some sort of building up for the anticipated vessel that may be coming. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I think there's a lot to that. We're sort of starting to try to baby step into how do we understand these interfaces between the primary modes as we're trying to better understand the supply chain of our goods. So how am I doing with another effective means? 5 or 10 minutes, okay. 5 or 10 minutes means I'm going to
10 minutes, 10 minutes.
10 minutes. So if I ask again, I get 50. All right, I'm going to do this one. Urgent deliveries right now are kind of crushing our transportation system. That's what's straining our supply chain. That's where we're seeing bottlenecks in the system. Everything I talked about is all about better understanding what the impacts are on the system so that we can better understand where we should be putting in particular projects, priorities, and policies into the system. One thing to keep in mind on the trucking side, or essentially really on the let's see, trucking, yeah, on the trucking side, and really any kind of freight delivery, their main goal is making sure that they get their delivery. So when you order something, that's the most important thing to you, right? When am I going to get my present? When am I going to get those goods? When is that stuff going to show up? And if they start to make promises about next day or that afternoon, that impacts the transportation system, obviously. They have to have the goods really close to you for an afternoon delivery And so that's going to have tremendous impacts on how we're going to plan cities, how they're going to have to move those goods, get those goods in closer to you. All of those things are going to have tremendous impacts. It might also mean that they're going to have more trucks. And then there's also this big issue with access to the curb. And there's a lot that I can talk about with curb management. But I'm going to save that part for another day. And instead, what I'm going to do in my last probably 7 minutes, skip a couple of these slides. Did you catch all that? I know you guys are bright, but I really won't. One thing I do sometimes is I see if I'm trying to see where things are going, not in the private sector, right? If I was doing any of this stuff, I'd be out in the private sector making lots of money, right? Not so driven about that. Driven that way, and not necessarily the way I look at things, but I look at what are the big companies doing. So Amazon's always a good indicator of where are things moving. So look at what are they patenting? Where's their head at, so to speak? Here's where their head's at. These are actual patents from Amazon. This is one where they're talking, they've patented an underground conveyor system. Just like your utilities, sewer, water, everything runs under the ground. They'll run their products under the ground, shoot them right to you, get them right to you. Obviously, you're all thinking about that's good engineers, planners. What's going to go wrong with that? But, that's all details. Big picture, they patented the particular idea. Here's another one. Fulfillment centers in these hives of drones that can go in urban areas to provide the deliveries to different places. Underwater warehouses. We're running out of land and space to grow. Put it in hermetically sealed boxes, RFID tags on them, drop them in the water, pull them up when you need them. Again, the space is at a premium so much that these things are being talked about. For the air. This is the sea, this is the air. Again, all this pressure, we think we need to have that tube of toothpaste or something this afternoon. Have to have it delivered to our house. This is some of the implications and what they're thinking about to provide the solution to supply that. Drones going off of, again, access, and it's so expensive to get into the big cities and provide any kind of distribution from there. Well, what about putting the distribution on the trains that are going through the city? Let's fly them off of the trains as it's going through the city. Last one for drones, takeoff landing, just like when you actually literally fly. That's the risky and most difficult part about any kind of air activity. In this case, landing and taking off is the biggest risk to the drone. So drop a little cone down, drop the cargo into the cone down in front of your driveway. So they patented all these things. I tell you this for a couple of reasons, just to help get you thinking about what the future might look like, to get you thinking about what our potential data sources could be like, and what are some of, as engineers and planners, some of the big challenges that are coming down as it relates to these things. So basically I always talk about technological solutions are coming, they're actually really are here. I get many questions about, well, what do you think about technology, whatever. Well, I always tell people if it's going to help the private sector get things there safely and reliably on time, it's going to be a conversation as a possibility. Then I think I'm going to give you one more slide here. I'll just leave all three of these up so you can kind of think about them while I tell you them. So as we reflect on data considerations, as data geeks, and I know we all have a little data geek in us, it's still really, we want as much as we can get, right? So it's always important to try to keep in mind what really do you need, what really do you need it for, because there's going to be additional costs for these data, and that's going to be continue to be a theme. Data governance is critical. So really what that means, if you're not familiar with the term, is who owns it, why, when, who controls it, who manages it. Because there's a lot of often proprietary data, frequently non-disclosure agreements if you're using data from a vendor. So you need, and then also when we start talking more about getting data from the private sector is so important. The supply chain side of things, so much of that is privately driven. So looking for opportunities for public-private partnerships with industry to get that type of information is important. Need human resources. We're several students. Y'all are the ones that are going to help figure this out. Those in TV land also will help figure this out. We need a lot more data scientists, people that handle these large data sets that are out there. And in addition to that, there's an aspect of knowing how to manipulate the data and get the answer, but then there's an understanding of transportation and, when does an AT look? Anybody can do the math at some level, take a huge data set, crank out a number, but being able to look at it from a transportation perspective and say that AT is too high or that doesn't make sense there. That's really in our field, the folks that are really going to set themselves apart to be able to understand what makes sense. So I'd encourage you to be able to think about that. The GIS, obviously, and I'm sure y'all are getting more and more exposed to that, is critically important as well. And the visualization communication, certainly important. A couple of things I would say, it doesn't have to be the fanciest. First and foremost, a lot of the sponsors that we work with, just starting to get some of this information out in a visualization platform is really helpful because they're just starting out. But I would encourage just get the information out there, make sure you've got some economics in it so that people can relate it to costs and those opportunities, because that's really what resonates a lot with folks. And I think that's primarily it. This contact stuff, a couple of with TRB, I'm no longer the chair of the Urban Freight Committee, but I'm now Freight Group Chair, so over several of the different committees. But related to urban freight and the section on urban management, I wasn't able to get into as much. I do want to plug our websites here. We did this neat paper that's listed here on the bottom of this page. So if that sort of stuff is of interest to you, I encourage you to take a look at that. Looks at the past and present and future and what we might be up against in the future. I think that's it. I think that's the main stuff I've been covering.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Do we have any questions? So on the slide about the Dallas Fort Worth area, where instead of building extra roads, you can move the physical buildings that they're traveling to. Have you guys considered not moving any physical building or object, and maybe rerouting the vehicles, like truck only exit, and so therefore just kind of deters any traffic?
Yeah, that was probably a quick example that I gave, but I think what you're suggesting is certainly important. I may have said move the facility. I don't know that I
Physically move that.
But it might mean, they leave that there, but perhaps they put another cross dock station in somewhere else that brings in folks. But yeah, I think all of those freight solutions are on the table that you expressed, and probably many others as well, depending upon who we see is using the facility and where. I think the most important takeaway from that slide for me is we don't just necessarily need to say we widen this road as well. Just it's probably something deeper than that. The data that we're getting, data we'll be able to get as we become more and more connected with automated connected vehicles, that stuff starts happening, I skipped over my slide on all the robots and mobility as a service and some of the connecting types of scooters and any other sorts of transportation modes as we start to get a little bit more insight in all those different modes. That's all. One of those decisions.
Any other question?
Just a clarification, please. You mentioned earlier that urgent deliveries is what's kind of taxing our deliveries, our supply chain. How is that different from regular deliveries? What's the threshold urgent delivery versus a regular delivery?
Yeah, I think what's been different, and we've seen it in the last couple of years, is how much of it was out there. Actually, y'all are asking me questions about the slide I skipped. So that tells me those are good slides that I'll get to at some point. I was talking about the real growth in e-commerce. I think retail sales were maybe 5% e-commerce in 2019 or so, and then they shot up to close to 20% in 2020. And if I would have gotten here in 2019 and been standing here and giving you the information, I would have been talking about how stressed our transportation system was already. I would have been showing you the same sorts of slides from Amazon and the patents and things that they were talking about. But now what we've done is we've just accelerated all of that with that growth. So I guess to really answer your question, I'm talking about all of it, that baseline, but then now it's really the game's been upped with that promises of how we get that something to be happening. Yes, sir.
So I think to expand on G's issue here is that urgency of receiving product. And like for example, Amazon is always offering you that option for free. So even if you don't need it the next day, well, why not? You click it. And I think that's more of a policy issue in my opinion, because it's okay, urgency. Maybe you should have ordered it earlier. That's a you problem. Not something that affects all of us from a network perspective. You know, it's made them more marketable. It's made them more money and for their investors as well. But now it's getting into something that affects all of us on a daily basis. You know, so it's just something to consider. Also, one more thing I want to add is, so in 2020 we saw growth in e-commerce, but that's because everyone was at home, coupled with stimulus checks. These people weren't working. They were able to use that excess funds to buy more stuff online. They had nothing else to do. So now that we're out and about moving through it, I'd like to see, what the next 5 years, how that data looks. If it goes down, if it stays. I don't think it'll continue to increase at the same pace, because my hypothesis is that was a very specific situation. But if it continues to increase, then that's a real problem from transportation on the land side. But I digress. Thank you.
No, well, I don't think you digress, and I think your comments are very thoughtful, and I think you're spot on. It will be interesting to see what happens with that in the future. You touch on how the bottom line is all of the decisions that we're making as consumers are really impacting all of us. And I have some other slides about that I didn't share here that talk about some other things of what we're seeing, issues. But yeah, it's definitely a new normal. I think these things are going to continue to increase, because when you make that statement, you're kind of saying it from your perspective of, and that was based on your life experience. Well, now there's other life experiences out there of people who had never even had anything to live for. And now there's this whole market of folks that are like, hey, I can eat Doritos, and that stuff just shows up. And I don't even. Hey, that's pretty cool. Exactly. So we are in interesting times. Everybody's sort of rethinking how they do work, live, and play, and see how a lot of this plays out. Yes, sir.
With so many things being delivered, though, wouldn't it reduce the stress of people physically driving to the location to buy things, like going to the mall and buy things and stuff like that? Does that reduce the stress on the? I would imagine if you have one big truck delivering to everybody instead of everybody going out,
Yeah,
that would probably, you know, reduce the traffic.
there's some of that, then there's other things that play against it. Of if the system is too congested, then maybe they have to put more trucks out. As just, one example, but you look at it from a business perspective, if I'm a grocer, what we're starting to see is everybody that wants their groceries delivered, now a grocer is not only a supplier of goods, but they're providing a transportation service. They're like, that's gotta stop, because they can't really afford to be doing that. So you'll see how I think one of the biggest challenges in retail of food and everything else right now is how do we get customers from their perspective to come back and provide the transportation service that we've got stuff providing for the last couple of years. So to your point, I mean, that's going to increase traffic more so, right? Because then that's a lot of singles going rather than out. But again, all these things I think we're to see how these things play out. These are all really important things.
Then I have one more question about the drones. Are they really seriously considering, delivering things by drone? I mean, people are already porch pirates stealing stuff off the porches. Like, I can't imagine what's going to stop people from like chopping things up in the sky to knock those things down and steal merchandise from the drone. So, and maybe the drone itself they can still on as well. I just don't see that as being a viable option.
I don't think it's tomorrow.
Okay.
I think it's something like this. It's, this is just these are potential markets that they lock up, that they've got patents on. But I fully agree with you. There's noise issues that they've got to still work through. There's FCC issue, FAA issues that have to be worked through and all that stuff. But if you're a big corporation, you have a department, Amazon does, that this is what you do. Go think of good ideas, think about what we need to be happening to stay on top of things. And, many of those things will come to fruition. Some will. And so it's kind of important.
How do you define the differences now between trucks and cars? Because a lot of times, like these grocery stores and even Amazon and UPS are delivering things in regular passenger vehicles.
Right.
Yeah. Like, can you see that in the data at all or no?
Yeah, we can't. There's this end we get and this end we get, but it's you're right. There's this gray area that we can only sort of estimate what's kind of going on in there. But hopefully the improved data sets, some connected vehicles, ways of better understanding that would certainly help. Yeah, we're doing great in other places like that, doing those sorts of things that will.
Do we have any question from the WebEx chat?
I'm not seeing the questions.
Does anyone has any question from WebEx? No?
No, not at the moment.
Somebody's trying to.
Somebody wants to say. Hold on.
We see someone's trying to speak. We're looking at trying to get your audio in the room. It's not currently working. Maybe type in if somebody has a question, perhaps type it in.
Anita, could you please type the question on the chat? How can I extend the video? So how can I extend the video? Late.
I don't feel like I'm.
Yeah, you know her. Second day.
drones, and I know we have someone in planning here too. Is there any discussion for that, like the planning wise, you know, as far as like drone deployment or, you know, high hub, like you mentioned? Or is it just kind of all up in the air, like, oh, this is an idea, but there's no like thought putting where there is? I generally want to know.
Yeah, well, I think drones, micro mobility, all of these new emerging ways of development are all goods delivery are all things that as planners, you know, possibilities to call it.
You know, it's kind of a nightmare because, all right, let's assume drones don't make any noise. There's a security aspect of it, and they're all delivering in residential areas. If you have someone that's, you know, savvy enough to hack that, it could pick up your projectile at that point. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, and you know, currently there's seen stories y'all probably have too of drone deliveries of medical supplies in their areas. So
Yeah.
You know, there's a niche already. You know, certainly
It's like it's an FAA issue, and there's a lot of safety implications to that. How you manage
That
space.
Yeah.
So I think we have to stop here. Okay. Bill, on behalf of the IT FAU student chapter, we would like to thank you for your time to visit us, and I hope that you have a nice time at Boca Raton. Thank you also.